Glasgow in Scotland. And before I go into my talk, I thought, given the conference theme of crossings, because this is the first CHI in Asia, and not everyone might know where Glasgow or even Scotland is, I thought I'd give a quick overview of our crossing to Seoul. So the University of Glasgow is over 550 years old. It looks a bit like Hogwarts, although it has fewer moving staircases. It's in the west end of the city of Glasgow, which is the biggest city in Scotland, which is itself a devolved country within the United Kingdom, of about 5.3 million people. It's situated towards the Atlantic coast, so our weather is terrible, but we have fantastic indoor music, theatre, and arts to escape from. So Glasgow is 5,371 miles from Seoul, which many of you know is over 5 times the distance that the proclaimers would walk just to sit down at your door. So we've crossed Europe and Asia to be here, and now we're in Seoul. The Scottish SIGCHI community has put together this wee booklet to introduce ourselves to you, and we also have a party tomorrow night to introduce ourselves in person. So if you're lucky, you may have a ticket. If you're even luckier, you may find somebody who still has a ticket. We look forward to welcoming you there. So I'd just like to say, 안녕하세요 from Glasgow. So this research is stuff we did with myself. Gavin Davidson was a student, and Steve Brewster's in the audience, looking at how people naturally assign meaning to different thermal stimuli in the context of different interactions. So we know that physical warmth increases subjective, social, and physical closeness. So something as simple as holding a warm cup of coffee will make you feel physically and emotionally closer to people around you. So during the coffee breaks, if you have a hot cup of coffee, you're more likely to feel closer to those next to you compared to a cold drink. And also, concrete experiences help to ground abstract concepts. So the concrete physical warmth you get when somebody hugs you helps you to ground and process the abstract emotion of affection that you feel when you get it. And so the two are combined and co-experienced and help to just define the experience, and they're almost inseparable. And so at least in English, it's led to terms such as warm and loving, or in contrast, cold and distant. Somebody could be said to have a burning passion. And what do bow ties, fezzes, and the fawns all have in common? That's right, they're all cool. So, thermal stimulation is an inherent aspect to sensory experience, and it has strong links to both social and emotional phenomena. And we wanted to look at this and kind of leverage this and ask the question, how do people naturally assign meaning to abstract thermal feedback during different interactions? So what we did, we chose 4 common interaction scenarios that tap into either social or emotional phenomena. During these interactions, we presented a participant with both warm and cool stimuli, so ranging from 22 to 38 degrees. And during the course of those, they were asked simply what meaning they took from the thermal stimulus in the context of that interaction. Just a quick overview of the device we used. So we had two 2-centimeter Peltier modules. So these here are ceramic plates, which basically you can pass a current through, and it transfers energy from the top plate to the bottom plate. Or if we reverse the current, it sends it the other way, so it means that the exposed side can be both warmed and cooled. We had a Bluetooth microcontroller, which was connected to either a mobile phone or a PC, depending on the application. And although it can be battery-powered and can be entirely mobile, we had it mains-powered for the experiment. While it's capable of outputting between -20 and 45 degrees, we stuck between 22 and 38 for comfort reasons, so staying within the pain thresholds. And it was centered around a 30 degrees neutral. We changed it kind of faster rate at 3 degrees per second, so the faster you change temperature, the stronger the sensation. So we kept to that higher rate to keep the sensation strong. And as you can see at the bottom, the participant just rested the base of their palm on the 2 Pelties during the experiment and used their right hand to interact with the phone or the PC. Okay. So the 4 scenarios were a social media application, where we looked at the interpretation of thermal feedback in terms of recency, so recent time. A smart office scenario, which we looked at the associations to the physical presence of somebody. Digital content deletion, so matching the feedback to the extent of use of the digital content. And finally, a restaurant review scenario, where we had the participants choose their own stimuli to represent their own subjective experience during a restaurant visit. So I'll go through each one individually, showing the design procedure and the results. So in terms of social media, some people, like the Guardian newspaper here, can send out about 10 tweets within 10 minutes, whereas my poor excuse for a Twitter account has 5 tweets within 2 years. So the idea is, how does thermal feedback relate to recency? Could you get a quick overview of somebody's activity directly from a contact list? So simply touch them on the contact list and get the feedback. So we attached 9 different stimuli to 18 names at random in the contact list, so between 22 and 38 in 2-degree intervals. And simply, when they pressed on the contact, they got the feedback, and we asked them, how long ago was this person on social media? So the interface was on the phone. They just long pressed the name. They were asked to select a name at random. They were then presented with the thermal feedback. And for this case, asked how long ago they were on social media. They first chose a timescale, so set between seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. And they were then asked to enter a numeric value to enumerate the timescale. So in this case, say 3 in weeks, means that the feedback was represented, the person was active 3 weeks ago. So we put all that together, and the results were pretty consistent. So the colder stimuli, those below 30 degrees, were commonly interpreted as being older activities, so between days and months ago, whereas the warmer stimuli over 30 degrees were more recent activities, so just seconds to hours. And in the graph here, you can see the proportion of time frames attributed to each temperature, so temperature along the bottom. So for the hottest temperature, it's mostly blue seconds and red minutes. And then as the temperature goes down, you can see some green hours, purple days, weeks, months, and years, and so on. So as the temperature goes down, the time frame increases, basically. So we found a strong and reliable relationship between temperature and recency, with warm being recent, cold being old. And the results could be applied to other interaction scenarios that involve time or recency. But at least with these specific time frames, we found that the best temperatures were particularly associated with those time frames. The suggested ones here were more weakly associated, but could still be appropriate. Okay, so the second scenario was based on the idea of a smart office. So if you could augment your door handle with thermal feedback, could you use that to quickly and privately convey your presence or your availability? So this time we presented 5 different stimuli at 4-degree intervals to the participant, and then we asked them to choose which of these options best suited the feedback they got. So out of department, back soon, in please knock, available for short times, and extremely busy. So they're fairly common availability categories. You can get these kind of dials for offices and so on. So presented the feedback, and then just gave them an interface, and they just chose whichever option they thought best suited the temperature. And again, the results were consistent. Warmth this time indicated the presence of somebody, and cold indicated the absence. But beyond that, greater warmth indicated the person was present, but they were busier. They had a higher level of activity. So for the middling temperature of 30 degrees, most of the responses simply said, in please knock, so the person is present, but they're not doing much. Whereas for the hottest temperature, the 38 degrees, most of the responses interpreted that greater extent of warmth as a greater extent of activity or busyness. And conversely, the coldest temperature was mostly rated as being out of department. So not only were they absent, there was a greater extent or greater degree of absence attributed to the greater extent of cold. So warmth indicates physical presence, but heat, so greater warmth, could indicate higher activity. So if your phone gets warm, it could be that your friend is nearby. But if it gets hot, it means your friend is nearby, but they're currently busy, so they can't meet up. And with cold, your phone gets cool, it could be that you have no friends nearby. But if it gets cold, it could mean you have no friends at all. So again, you could apply this to any kind of situation which involves presence or proximity. But again, for the particular categories, we found that these temperatures work the best. So the content deletion scenario looked at applying the thermal feedback to the usage of the the content. So can or does thermal feedback relate to the extent of use? Various computing functions result in permanent change, such as deletion or reverting to a factory state. But then the severity of that deletion will probably depend on how important the content is, and how much that content is used is related to how important it is. So for example, am I a believer? No. Delete. But am I Meshuggah? Yes, I am. So keep that. We focused on app deletion because it's a kind of everyday scenario. This time we attached 9 stimuli to 18 different apps in a kind of a standard app drawer. We asked the participant to delete the app, and when they got the feedback, we asked them how much has this application been used based on the feedback. We used a magnitude estimation method. In this case, there was no set category. The participant was just to enter a value that they thought represented the overall extent of use. So just any number, subjective value they could use to indicate the amount of use. So that includes hundreds, thousands, negative numbers, whatever they felt represented the magnitude of use. We gave them a 50 as a moderate amount of usage, just to give them some structure. But they were free to put any value they want. So we had a kind of a fake app drawer, which you kind of can see. Participant long pressed, and they got the feedback for that app. And then they entered their value. And again, the results were consistent. We had a strong positive significant correlation between the temperature and the magnitude of usage. In this case, it's normalized magnitude. So as the temperature increases, the perceived amount of use goes up. So higher temperatures mean higher use. And there's actually a significant difference between each of these values, so each of these and compared to the lowest ones, so which suggests that we're all kind of, they were perceptually distinct. And also, interestingly, the coldest temperatures were not different from each other, but they were different from the rest, which suggests that cold is kind of interpreted as a singular state of disuse. This means unused, whereas increasing degrees of warmth suggest increasing extents of use. So again, a strong relationship between temperature and usage, but it could also be used to help a user to reflect on risky actions. So sharing their personal information, going to websites they shouldn't go to, and so on. Cold kind of indicates unuse, and a greater use can be conveyed by increasing temperature. And it does suggest that participants can appreciate up to 7 temperature levels, which is more than the research kind of suggested before. So they weren't uniquely identifying these 7 levels, but because of the significant differences, it suggests that they were appreciably different on some level. Okay, so the final scenario was the restaurant experience. The previous 3 scenarios, we gave participants our own set stimuli, and we asked them what meaning they meant. In this case, we asked the participants themselves to choose their own thermal stimuli to represent their own personal subjective experience, in this case going to a restaurant. So what thermal stimuli do people choose to represent their experience, and why do they associate that particular temperature with that experience? So in the example of restaurants, regardless of what rating you give it, you could give that rating for different reasons. So it could be 5 stars because the food is good, or it could be 5 stars because the service is great, or the atmosphere is great. A good place could be warm because it was good, or it could be cold because it sells nice, refreshing beer on a hot day. A bad place could be cold because it's rubbish, or a bad place could be hot because somebody there made you angry. So there's lots of kind of open space to get different interpretations of the feedback. So the participants chose restaurants, so they had personally visited around Glasgow, and they could choose their own temperature between 22 and 38 to represent that experience. They were given a text box to describe why they chose that temperature, what meaning they take from that temperature, and also to specify whether the restaurant was good, average, or bad, to look at the temperatures they chose in relation to the temperature, but also to separate the temperature from the quality of the place. So we just present the interface. They could first move the slider from down the bottom, which was cold, up to the top, which was hot, and the temperature changed in real time as they did this, so they could settle on whatever temperature they liked. And they entered a texture response in the box. So the temperatures chosen basically matched the overall quality of the restaurant there. So good places were warm, 35 degrees, average places were medium, whereas bad places were 25 degrees. So this it's nice because, actually, looking back to the last two talks where you had problems with valence, it seems that temperature has quite a nice inherent valence aspect to it. And looking at the categories that people, or the reasons people gave for their temperatures, the vast majority were just actually relating to the overall quality or rating of the experience. There were a few hedonic or emotional comments, which I'll go over in a minute, a few social, and very few were used to represent the physical qualities of either the food or the drink, so that's like, you know, hot or cold drinks, or the physical environment that they were in. So most comments were about quality. So examples, good restaurants, so warm temperature. Good food, like that delicious cheesecake, 34 degrees. The food was okay, so neutral temperature, kind of meh. Or crappy food, like that gelatinous mess at the bottom. For the hedonic emotional, they tended to be about the atmosphere, the subjective atmosphere of the place, or sometimes away from actual temperature. So this person said it was good because the coffee smells nice. So although the coffee itself is hot, they weren't mentioning the heat of the coffee that was nice. It was the smell, so kind of a positive emotional experience, but still related to heat. And conversely, poor atmosphere, 25 degrees. So as I said, very few were used to actually represent the concrete temperatures experience. So you get hot from dancing, 34 degrees. Very spicy, so somebody had very spicy food, and I thought it was interesting to match the kind of the spicy heat of the food to the heat of the temperature. One person went in winter, so they were freezing, so they're representing the cold winter with their temperatures. And somebody got a cold meal and had a terrible time, so they gave cold. So overall, temperature can strongly be used to convey the quality of the place. So just a quick kind of example here. You could use cold, 25 degrees for a 1-star restaurant, up to 35 degrees hot for a 5-star restaurant. But temperature can also be used to convey either a good through warmth or a bad through cold, atmosphere, or good and bad food. And temperature is used much more to convey abstract or subjective aspects rather than concrete aspects. So at the beginning I said that the concrete physical warmth or temperatures in general are used to ground abstract concepts, and it seems that people use this physical temperature to convey these abstract emotions as well. So they actually use, rather than, because they're so inextricably linked, the temperature itself is used to convey these abstract emotions rather than the physical temperatures that they experienced. So just to quickly summarize and repeat myself. High degree of common interpretation. So across participants, it was largely almost universal application of meaning to temperatures. It was a really kind of reliable and sustainable interpretation you can get. Warmth means social or physical presence. Thermal feedback can also be used to convey risk-related status and usage. Users can appreciate multiple levels of feedback. While they may not be able to identify them, they can still make use of them and appreciate them. And temperature strongly maps to quality. And that's the end of my talk, and thanks very much.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm SIGCHI from KAIST, and I'm just curious about one thing.
Yeah.
In your study, you used something giving temperature in the participant's arm.
The hand, yeah, the panel.
The hand?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about just ambient temperature, such as, could I say that the restaurant visited in summer is better than restaurants visited in winter, or?
Well, that's what we kind of wanted to see. How do people convey that? Do they think that hot is good or cold is good? So that's an interesting question, because if you gave somebody something hot, they might automatically assume it's good. If you gave somebody cold, they would assume it's bad. But you could have been to the best restaurant you've ever been to, and it was like in these ice bars. You know, you get bars that are actually made of ice, and you have to go in with a jacket, and they could be really good, but it's freezing cold, and so you associate that with freezing cold. So unfortunately, because the interpretations were so universal, if you presented somebody with cold, I think the automatic assumption would be negative, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you.
May I ask? Okay. Hi, and this is Hiro Umemuro from Tokyo Institute of Technology.
Hi.
And thank you very much for very interesting research. And the relationship between the warmth and closeness or goodness, very intuitive. I could understand. But I was wondering why there was such a significant correlations between temperature and the usage of the function, I mean the deletion of the contents. What kind of logical explanation is possible for this? Is it simply because the high temperature lead to high arousal and leading to high activity?
That could well be it. It could be another, if you exercise, that higher level of activity comes with high body heat and higher heart rate, so kind of a general higher temperature. Possibly because we know that when we use our phones a lot, they get hot. That could also be an aspect of it, because it was based on a mobile phone. That could possibly be an input. But I think, as you say, the physiological response is quite a good explanation, given the inherent link between warmth and overall biological activity. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we have limited time.
I'll
so
switch
maybe
over.
a quick
Oh, sorry.
You could ask while I'm switching over if you want.
Hi, Graham. Just real quick. I was wondering if you notice any cultural differences, because I could imagine that a Scot is more drawn to warmth than someone from southern Spain.
Well, I'll be happy to contradict you. We haven't looked at it specifically, but as you would assume, as the weather is terrible in Scotland, you'd think that Scottish people would like warmth more. But in terms of perception and subjective comfort, cold was always rated better than warmth. That could then be because Scots are used to cold weather, and so that coldness is kind of more familiar to them. But that would then go against the assumption that different, say, warmer cultures are used to warm or so on. So I would love to go around the world and test this and come back and answer you next year. Okay.
Thank you. Our last but not least paper